Okay, hello again. I'm Dr. John Apsley, and I'm here with two experts in the field of nuclear power. What I'd like to propose that we talk about right now is more longer-term permanent solutions. I do not feel that we're headed in the best direction right now with nuclear power, simply because we know from the National Academy of Sciences that any amount of radiation produced, including that within the normal background radiation, is highly contributory to not only cancer rates here in this country, but also other forms of chronic illness. Also, in Japan, they depend a great deal upon nuclear power, but yet they are right on the earthquake fault zone. And as the good doctor here has said, that within the next 40 years, because it's going to take at least 40 years to clean up what's happened there, they're very, very liable to suffer another earthquake of great consequence. And if they don't do a proper storage and removal system in time, that earthquake may come in sooner than they have a chance to move all that material out of harm's way. It just so happens that David here is an expert in alternative energy systems that are actually working. Now, I did have the privilege of going into John Bedini's laboratory, who's in Spokane, just outside of Spokane, Washington, where he has developed machines that actually produce more energy than they consume. And I was able to witness this over a period of many hours, that using lead acetate batteries, one in sequence with 9, he was able to take one lead acetate battery and with his magnetic system drive enough electrical return to be able to charge up 9 lead acetate batteries before the one lead acetate battery that was running the machine ran out. So for every one lead acetate battery, he was able to recharge 9. And so just by harnessing that technology, you can see that you can produce an excess amount of electricity. So I'd like to turn this over briefly to David to start with this concept of, do we really today have the technology to start producing power systems that are much, much more safe and start moving away in an economical fashion away from nuclear power? Because as you heard me say to Dr. Klein, in Japan at least, those taxpayers are going to pay for this. There are Gorbachev said that Chernobyl basically bankrupted the Soviet Union by itself. Now, when you have one nuclear accident that's able to bankrupt an entire country, and now you have 4 reactors, or one storage fuel pool and 3 other reactors, what kind of economic impact is that going to have upon Japan long term? And on that basis alone, is it really economical to use nuclear power at all when it's going to be in the billions and tens of billions and hundreds of billions at the end of the day to fix the mess that's at Fukushima? And as you just heard, the Japanese government's not going to do it. They're not going to invest even the $20 billion that he talked about. They're going to go with $20 billion to invest in the U.S. Olympics. Where's this money going to come from? And as he correctly pointed out, you've got to go to the international community, and I'm not sure the American taxpayer has the appetite to help out in that kind of way, because we're already $17 trillion in debt ourselves. So if we can sustain ourselves through systems to power everything as we currently need and what will be projected in the future in ways that are very inexpensive, we have 2 things. We have to build them, and we have a lot of political rugby that's going to come against us to make those systems work because of the powers that be that are running the current power grid. Now, I don't know if you know this, but the #1 industry in the world is the power producing industry. The #2 most powerful industry in the world is the cancer control industry. So if the cure for cancer came out tomorrow, we'd have a big problem, because there is a whole economic system that's wrapping around the control of cancer, not the cure of cancer. Same thing is true in the nuclear power industry or the coal burning or any of the other current systems that we have. If we had a system that was basically using free energy that didn't cost anything but would produce all the energy that we need, that would cause severe disruptions in the economic systems that we have. So we have to do this very judiciously, but it's going to be an uphill battle all the way. So I'll turn this over to David and have him explain some of the solutions that he's seen.
Well, the first thing I'll do is take my hat off to the Japanese. Doctor, I don't know if you are familiar with the name Eguchi.
There are many
Yoshinori Eguchi. In 1936, he office for what he called a self-recharging capacitor. The Japanese used them during the... oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. We're having a conversation. In Japan in the early 30s, a Japanese scientist by the name of Yoshinori Eguchi received a U.S. patent for what he called a self-recharging capacitor. A capacitor is a device that uses mismatched materials with a charge barrier to store an electrical charge. A battery releases a charge slowly as it's on demand. A capacitor releases it all at once. Okay? Well, he invented a way to take discs of different kinds of metals, realizing that these metals have different what they call dielectric properties. And he was able to create a grid using a number of metals of graduated dielectric constants separated by a very fine membrane, 1 molecule thick, of some special waxes. And when he did these metals properly, prepared them, bathed them in his preparation of waxes, put them in an oven while they were squeezed together, took them up to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and as they were cooling to room temperature over a 24-hour period, connected a battery with a very high direct current to them and kept it running until they got back down to room temperature. Once that pre-charge had been administered, as long as that stack of metals separated by a wax membrane was connected to a load, it continued to produce power at the same rate at which it was originally charged. Now, the Japanese used these devices in a variety of different configurations all over the Pacific Theater and in China during the Second World War. And there was a big deal that went on at the end of the war while MacArthur was out there waging war, recovering islands in the Pacific. They'd take over the communications facilities, but they never found any batteries. And they thought there was a big conspiracy, some special deal that the Japanese were doing to take the batteries out so the Americans couldn't get their hands on them, because American batteries were terrible. They had a very short life expectancy, and there was always a big problem. They were huge, big dry cell batteries. They could never get enough of them. Well, we know now, based on the historical information, that these self-recharging capacitors worked beautifully. And the fact that they are scalable means that you can make arrays of them connected in parallel and in series to produce power. And it doesn't burn any fuel, it doesn't create any load, it doesn't create any exhaust. And nobody makes them anymore. The only thing that's similar to it is a little device that you buy at Radio Shack that you power with a AAA battery inside a little toy microphone called the Ceramet. That's the closest thing anybody makes to these things. A Ceramet. It's a ceramic device that takes little pieces of metal and separates them inside of a ceramic barrier. So, if we did nothing else but just make self-recharging capacitors, all the batteries that we use to power all of our electronic devices would become unnecessary. I know the battery guys are not happy to hear that their $46 billion a year undertaking just became obsolete as of November of 1936. So that's a true fact. You can go look that up on Google. We've made some, and they're really interesting. I knocked myself right on the floor. I forgot that you don't reach in and grab it like that.
It makes you sick, too.
Oh, baby.
Yeah.
Oh, baby. I went right on the floor. It really knocked me out. But because I broke the circuit, then I had to go back and recharge it again in order for it to get back into its recharging state. The fact that there are self-sustaining energy sources is not news. This has been going on for a long time. I mean, you've read the biography. If you haven't, you should, of Nikola Tesla. The more recent biography describes what happened in 1925 with his Pierce Arrow. He created a box that produced power to drive his Pierce Arrow. He built the electric motor and all of the apparatus that went with it, took the engine out, took the gas tank out, took all of the gasoline stuff out, put his own alternating current electric motor and his own power source, and it ran with a rod that moved in and out of the box to control the amount of power that it produced. John D. Rockefeller got so unhappy about it that he went to J.P. Morgan, who was Tesla's sponsor, and told him to deliver a message to Tesla to take that box out of that car because it obsoleted the use of gasoline to drive transportation. He drove it for 18 months that way. Never burned a drop of fuel for 18 months. Drove all over New York. And when Tesla told him to pound sand, the next thing that happened was they burned his laboratory down. They sent him a message. So that's when it really began. There are other examples in earlier history, not very well documented, unfortunately. But since then, we know of several examples of self-sustaining engines that were both patented and demonstrable and which had practical applications. The first of them was invented by a guy during the 30s, during the deep, dark days of the Depression. He was a Chicago shoemaker, and he adapted an engine, connected it to a pressurized air tank. His name was Bob Neal, and in 1937 he got a patent from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for the Bob Neal engine, N-E-A-L. You Google it, you go get the patent, take a look at it. He did two things that were very important. In his engine, he figured out, he wasn't an engineer, he was a shoemaker, but he was a smart guy. He figured out how to solve a problem. What he did was build a 5-step valve that made it possible to take low-pressure air compressed by the pistons of the engine and put that low-pressure air into a tank that already had high pressure inside, so that by having high pressure inside the tank and low pressure outside the tank, he managed to create a self-amplifying effect. The second thing he did was he managed to figure out how to contain the heat of recompression. That is, whenever you compress air from a lower temperature or from a lower pressure to a high pressure, you liberate heat. That's just one of the laws of physics. You don't get to vote about that. Your compressor gets hot. Well, he contained the heat of compression inside the tank. So not only did his valve enable him to put low-pressure air into a high-pressure tank, but by doing so it created heat inside the tank, and that further increased the pressure. So he was able to take air out of the tank, use it to drive the engine, to turn the compressor, and had energy left over to run the equipment in his shoemaking shop. And when he first applied for the patent, it was denied on the basis that it was a perpetual motion machine and such things violate the patent regulations. So he put it in a box, put it on the back of his truck, took it to Washington, D.C., and unloaded it in the patent commissioner's office, turned it on, and demonstrated it for him. And at that point, he got his patent. The newspapers told the story that shortly thereafter, his daughter, 12 years old, was captured by agents of the Third Reich. They were in the process of getting ready to go to war. And they wanted that engine because it burned no fuel. It's self-sustained by means that they didn't understand, but they wanted it. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like to be able to run your army and all your vehicles, your airplanes, your tanks, your trucks, everything, without having to worry about supplying fuel? That's how the Allies defeated Germany in the first place, was they took away the fuel. Well, the State Department got involved, the FBI got involved, And eventually they got his daughter back, and he made a deal. He disassembled the engine and distributed to pieces, and his patent was classified for 50 years. Since that time, a lot of people have been trying to figure out how he made his engine work, and there's a lot of cockamamie stuff out there about zero-point energy and all kinds of serious nonsense. The fact of the matter is, it's just a really efficient heat exchanger. So what we did was we took the design, put it in motion with some off-the-shelf stuff. Most of it we bought from Home Depot. We got a air conditioning guy to come in and help us hook up the piping, and got a little compressor and put it all together. One piece that was important was we bought a little apparatus that was made for NASA for the space station. It's called an air booster. And it's the little compressor unit that they connect on the back of a compressor that takes 100 psi air and turns it into 4,000 psi air inside of a scuba tank. You ever seen those? Anybody that does any kind of scuba diving? So that little unit gets hotter than hell. I mean, they really get hot. And they're very robust, but they require no external mechanical or electrical support. So we just put it inside the tank and connected it all up. Put a little air engine on the back end of it and fired it up, and it ran like gangbusters. So we took the design, took the imagery, took the parts list, took all that stuff, and published it open source October 1st on PESWiki.com. You can go to Sterling Allen's site at PESWiki and get the design and build your own. It works. About 5. Yeah. Yeah, it's a small one. It's a 30-gallon tank. It cost us about $10,000 altogether. The little air booster from Haskell was $4,500 all by itself.
And their website again to find
PESWiki.com.
PESWiki.com.
Yes, ma'am. www.PESWiki. PureEnergySystemsWiki.com. Sterling Allen published that last October. Sterling Allen, he's the guy who runs the website. Yeah. A-L-L, I think it's A-L-L-A-N. Yep. About 10,000. We're getting ready to build a bigger one. We're going to try to have it ready to go to the Tesla conference this year down in Albuquerque.
Do you know you're going to have obstacles?
We'll talk about that in just a minute. But see these teeth marks in my left butt cheek? We know we've got some issues.
He dedicated. You gotta be.
We've actually got the design for 6 of these, 6 different kinds of engines that do this sort of thing. We're not going to sell it to the private market because we're not pretending we own it. Makes life a lot simpler. It is open source. We open sourced that one, and we're now in the process of open sourcing a second one. This one's not totally self-sustaining, but it's very cool. If you go to an island nation, an island community in the Pacific, what do they have in abundance there? They have sunshine. They have heat, right? In Japan, there are, 8,200 mapped sources of low-temperature geothermal. I mean, they sit right on the ring of fire there. That's what it is, the top of a volcano. And I went to high school in Japan. I've been on top of that mountain one time. Lots of people have figured out how to boil water, make steam, and turn a turbine, and make a generator go around and make electric power. There's a lot of that going on. That's what nuclear power plants do. But when you get down below the point at which you can't make steam anymore, even though it's kind of hot, it loses its utility, right? You can't make steam, you can't turn a turbine, you don't get the expansion coefficient in the gas. Well, everybody's got a refrigerator, right? How does a refrigerator work? You take Freon, you allow it to expand next to an open space, you allow it to expand into a series of tubes and pipes. As it does so, by expanding, it absorbs heat. You collect the Freon on the other end, you recompress it, put it back in the tank, use it again. Right? That's how a refrigerator works. Well, what if we took that Freon and we exposed that Freon in a grid to temperature 120 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. What would happen to the gas if I allowed it to go into an open space? It would really expand. And if I could recollect it after letting it do its work and dissipate its heat and put it back into the tank and use it again, I'd be able to take low temperature thermal values and turn it into work function in a drive shaft. Right? So we built a rotary engine, used a Wankel piston, a little rotor. We cut slots in the face out of a Fibonacci curve section so that its fluid mechanics are really efficient. We put the input in at the Fibonacci angle, and we use, plain old ordinary off-the-shelf heating, ventilating, and air conditioning stuff. But we take from the tank, we go through a valve, a standard refrigeration valve. At that point, we expose it to low temperature heat. You can't go higher than 180 because it demolecularizes 178 degrees. It then has terrific pressure. In the tank, it only has about 3 to 5 pounds per square inch at room temperature. That keeps it liquefied in a 20-gallon tank. But once I put it into pressure, I put it into temperature, that pressure goes way up, so I have to have pretty serious piping. But when I release it through a nozzle, as the rotor comes around and I allow it to expand into that open space, I get 485 pounds per square inch of pressure against that face. That's 5 times the pressure you get out of your compressor when you're putting it on your tire on your automobile. Okay? And your tire is only compressed at 30 to 35 pounds per square inch. So we got 15 times the pressure that's inside your tire every third of a rotation as that rotor goes around. And by the time it expands and pushes the rotor around 280 degrees to the exhaust port, it has now lost virtually all of its heat value because it's been expanding as a function of moving the rotor. It's dissipated it as a work function. Conservation of thermodynamic value. So it gets back down, actually it gets down to about 19 degrees. Goes back out through a valve, put it back into the tank, we do it again. We don't even have to have a radiator on it to cool it off because it's cold. It'll freeze water coming out of that exhaust port. So we've entered into an agreement with a group called worldharmony.com, world-harmony.com, and villageworks.com. They have a website up now. It's got an animation. It's got some narration. It's got all the numbers. It's got all the values. It asks all the questions, gives all the answers. It works. We're building one now in our shop so that we have a couple of demonstration prototypes. And the plan is take that engine out to some Pacific island like Tahiti, set that baby up, and let it run. Now think about this. If you've got an endless source of radiant heat, whether it's from sunshine or just ambient heat, and if you contain that heat in a thermal mass, like a 500-gallon tank full of some kind of slag that has real density and real high specific gravity, if I pump heat in there from a solar panel, I can get that up to about 160 degrees in an hour. And if I've got enough mass, even if I'm running Freon through that in a heat exchanger all night long, I can keep that thing running flat out in fifth gear and not reduce that temperature down below 120, which means I can produce power 24/7 without burning a drop of fuel and make no exhaust on an island, in the desert, next to the ocean where I can pump it, I can filter it, I can desalinate it, I can put it into a tank, I can irrigate with it, I can drink it, I can use it for all kinds of things. I don't care whether there's any rain out there. I got salt water by the gazillions of gallons. And I don't have to burn anybody else's fuel to pull that water out and make it happen. So that engine's in process of being built now. We know we have some issues. The issue is that once those engines really work and they're in a ubiquitously available source, then the model for the production and distribution of power that drives this first leg of the economic stool on the planet then begins to be in jeopardy. And we have to be just exceptionally careful about what we do and how we do it. One, we don't want to paint a target on our forehead. That's not smart. I'm not interested in the Nobel Prize and being on the David Letterman show. That has no interest to me. What does have an interest to me is getting that engine in that village someplace so those people can charge their cell phones and communicate and eat and refrigerate and irrigate their crops and have clean water to drink and get into the 21st century and become self-sustaining. That's what I'm interested in. So I wrote a book in 2008. It's called the Ho Chi Minh Guerrilla Warfare Handbook. Look, I'm an inventor, and I've made every conceivable mistake. Some of them a couple of times because I'm not the sharpest wedge, you know what I'm saying? So we all do the same thing in this country. I mean, we have an epiphany. We're going to save the planet. We've got the latest and greatest thing. It's going to do everything, and it's going to save the world. And the first thing we do as the sun comes up, 7 o'clock in the morning, we show up on the doorstep at Home Depot, and we max out our credit card. And we haul that crap home, and we take it in the garage, and we build our stuff, and it's not quite enough, and we didn't quite get it right. We don't keep track of what we did necessarily, but we're making a lot of motion, right? So then we go in, take money out of the savings account, and that's not quite enough. And then we go take a little money out of the school account, and that's not quite enough. And then we go sell the boat and the truck, and that's not quite enough. And then we go borrow money from our friends, and we get a second mortgage on the house. And if we only had $25,000 more, well, we'd be able to get it to do what we know it's going to do. And by the time we're $250,000 or $300,000 into this cockamamie idea, we're in so deep that we can't afford to back out. So then we have to start making excuses and telling people who have money that it'll do things it won't do because we know darn well it will if we could just get another $25,000. I mean, in America, we do that. We lie. And we get in trouble. If we do something that works, and it really is a disruptive technology, and we really do get the brass ring, then we get stupid. We decide we own it, we're going to go get a patent, we're going to protect it, we're going to be like that monkey with the fist in the coconut, we're going to go down with it because it's ours, by God, we're not going to let anybody take it away from us. And that's exactly where the big guys want us to be. That's exactly where they want us to be, pretending we own something and then devoting our life energy and our resources to keeping it, pretending that we've done something so special, get greedy, get stupid, don't pay attention, don't engage in good critical thinking. And when that happens, then the obvious results then occur. In the last 40 years, I've kept a list of all the people I know who've been down that road who now are no longer alive. My list now has 46 names on it. Lots of people who've made the mistake of trying to take these great technologies across that wasteland where the fields of fire are already fixed. Anytime we create a new innovation, like an engine that doesn't burn fuel, we create conflict because it disrupts the economic and political interest of the people who control the playing field. Even if we don't intend to declare war on anybody, by default, if our technology is genuinely disruptive, we create conflict, we create resistance. In the Vietnam conflict, a little old gray-haired guy with black pajamas and a bamboo hat defeated the mightiest assembly of armies in the history of the world with a sharpened bamboo stick and a stolen rifle. And it occurred to me that maybe we ought to know how he did that. I'm not suggesting that we lionize some of the things he did. I'm suggesting that he won a war he was really supposed to lose. Nobody gave him a chance at all. And the people he was fighting against are the same people that we have to deal with when we bring disruptive innovations into the land. It's the same bunch of people. We know their strategies. We know what they do. We know how they play. We know what they expect us to do and how they expect us to act. If we do, we shouldn't be surprised at the result. Right? So I read everything I could get my hands on about the guy, and I discovered that he comes at this from a whole different point of view. And you don't have to go across that minefield, and you don't have to expose yourself to fields of fire, and you don't have to get in trouble and be injured and damaged if you pay attention to what he knew. So in 18 chapters, there's 18 modules that teaches you how to ask the right questions before you go to Home Depot and max out your credit card in the first place. So we use the table of contents as the due diligence punch list for all the technologies we evaluate at the Nova Institute. It's not the standard due diligence punch list you get from the Wharton School of Business. We get different answers because we're asking different questions, but our stuff survives because we don't do things in a normal, ordinary, everyday, standardized way. We think them through and we get ourselves to a place where if we're going to do it, we know what we're going to do and why we're going to do it and how we're going to do it and how far we're prepared to go before we give it up if we get in trouble. So we've got issues, we've got technologies, the idea that engines can be made to propel themselves without burning fuel is not a new idea. Richard Clem did it in 1969. He built a unit that ran on canola oil, put it in his Thunderbird, and drove it 138 miles an hour down the highway toward Ann Arbor from Detroit to prove to the Ford Motor Company that it worked. He's one of the names on my list. He was stupid. A guy named Joe Papp built an engine called the Noble Gas Engine. I know it ran. I have videos of it running. One of my scientists is one of the guys that helped him build it. I used to own one. I bought one. Joe Papp was a Hungarian inventor. He was really smart. He got one patent that told people how to make it run, and it was an absolute red herring, and it's taken us 15 years to figure out what he did. We now know exactly what he did. We're building a different engine that uses the same principle. So understanding the science of it is the critical issue. And having the right kind of partners, being willing to take these things into the world so they do good things without pretending that we own them, by open sourcing them and making them available and sharing the information, is a strategy that works because we don't get caught in the crossfire by pretending they belong to us. They don't. They were given to us for a reason. We understand the importance of the stewardship, and we want to make them available to people. So we partner up with good folks who are willing to help us do that, and every time we get to a point where we know it's going to work, then we open source it and we make it available to everybody. So that's where we're headed with that. So in terms of the nuclear question, the issue becomes if you have access to engines that burn no fuel and they're scalable, first you build them small, and at some point in time, when the distribution systems can accommodate their replacement, when the political environment becomes amenable to it, this may take 2 or 3 generations for us to make this transition. If we're careful and we're judicious and we pay attention, we exercise good stewardship, we've got a chance.
Let me make a quick comment. Just a quick comment. So it's open source. So all you young college kids here that are got some brains, just build one for your home, for your apartment, and show your neighbor how to build it. And pretty soon it spreads. That's a republic. When you do it as sovereign yourself, we have allowed others to usurp our freedom, our sovereignty, by giving them all the ways in which that we have to pay for our services that we want in life. If we can just take an open source bit of instructions to develop 5 kilowatts or more, and we save for that, pretty soon the entire neighborhood's going to do the same thing, and then pretty soon the entire county. And it will spread, I think, a little bit quicker than 75 years from now. That's 3 generations. I think it might only take about 1, especially with young kids today who are already pretty well fed up with the status quo. That's what he's talking about. This is the solution. We have to do it ourselves. Don't get the federal government to do it, because the cronies are running the system right now. We have to do it ourselves, and this is the way to do it with the open source. Thank you very much, David. Any questions that anyone has on this? Come on up here.
Something of quite of interest to the people of the state of Texas who live in home rule charter communities. Getting your ordinances in line to allow for this type of technology to take place within the boundaries of these municipalities takes ordinances. And in the state of Texas, there is Texas Local Government Code, everybody get your pen out, Texas Local Government Code 9.004, that by petition of the people, we have the right to submit amendment changes to our city charters. City charters can only be changed once every 2 years, as can our Texas Constitution can only be changed once every 2 years. 2015 is coming up on our Texas legislation. The freedom to have choices of the type of energy we choose to have safe, reliable to our homes is being jeopardized by the legalities of the domains of these municipalities. However, with Texas Local Government Code 9004, by petition of the people, the wording goes directly from the petition, directly to the ballot, directly to the charter. It does not go through the approval of the City Council. It is one of the most powerful, purest forms of being able to move and make changes within our communities. Now, that's only available for home rule charter communities. Populations under 5,000 are under Texas common law, so they don't have that option. But this is something people need to have on their radar as well, of how to be able to permit this type of technology, and it's done at the local level through the ordinances. So, tidbit.
There you go.
Good point. Good advice. Yeah. How about a,
I have a question and I have a comment. Have you heard of the Kesh Foundation?
I have.
What do you think?
I think they're full of crap.
Do you?
I do.
Too bad, because he said he could clean up radiation.
Well,
We're using magnetics.
I've seen his website and I've seen his stuff, and it doesn't work.
So he'd also made his stuff openly available last week, I believe, and
he did.
So you've unpacked it and taken a look.
Well, he made a bunch of claims, and they couldn't deliver the goods because their stuff didn't work. They violated solicitation rules and got thrown out of Holland, went to Italy, got themselves in a bunch of trouble with the Italian government, and went open source to keep from going to jail. And that's where that goes. Part of the issue with American inventors is that they lie. And it's because they'd rather have the money than actually do the work. And we run into that on the internet all the time. And it's one of the things, like there's a guy named Bob Rohner, or John Rohner. His dad was the guy who built the Joe Papp engines in Iowa. Well, he pretends that he understands how that works, and he's taken $4 million of mom-and-pop grocery money out of the investment pool, lying, cheating, and stealing by misrepresenting what he's doing. Finally, that has come to an end. What that means is that good guys who really want to do good stuff, who really are good inventors and good engineers, who tell the truth and do good engineering, don't have access to that money anymore because it's gone. And more importantly than that, the well's been poisoned by a guy who took advantage of people who really wanted to help do something that works and makes a difference. So, you know, we get painted with the terrible tainted brush all the time, and that's part of what's wrong with the way America works. There is a serious failure of ethical and moral behavior in this country, and it gives us all terrible heartburn.
And there's where my comment comes in. It's very obvious from your discussion here today that clean energy is available and has been available for a long, long time. And part of what I see happening now with the powers that were, hopefully, is that they're making humans self-hating. They're telling us that we're ruining the planet, that we're polluting the planet. Well, we didn't kill the guy who invented the water car. They did that. It's corporations that are only answerable to the profit of profit.
It's not that easy, sweetie.
And not to, and not to, you know, and not
It's
to
just
our
not that
soul.
simple. I mean, you're part of the way correct, but it's just not that simple. As the good doctor says, you can't just reduce this to a conversation about the money and corporations.
Oh, I think it's eugenics as well.
Well, it's a long list of stuff. It's a conversation for another panel. But you know, all you really need to know is that if you really want to do something about it, you have options. You do. And nuclear power is an option if it's done in a way that's safe. The one piece of it that isn't safe is the nuclear fuel residue that nobody is either willing or able to do anything about remediating. That's what makes it difficult.
When I was a student protesting here at the University of Texas in 1975 against them building the nuclear plants here, I was accosted by a student outside the physics department who was telling me that by the time we would have a method of storing this. So everybody knew when they started producing all this waste that there was no solution for storing it, and just blindly went forward and said, well, we'll figure it out later. And we
have solutions. Now what we have to do is pull together the political will to impose on those whose obligation it is to make the solutions available, pay attention and use them. And that's really what the mission is. Thanks a lot.
I really appreciate that most of the knowledge that you're sharing is open source, but why is it that you can't, why is it someone can't contract you to build a system that you're talking about, you know, some of these engines? I know you don't want to sell the product because you're saying it's open source, but many times people, you know, we work and we just don't have the time to spend experimenting. Why is it that we can't, or someone can't pay you for your service?
Look, nobody's objecting to getting paid. Mm-hmm. Nobody, especially me, nobody's objecting to the idea that you can bring value and add that to the proposition and be paid. There's nothing wrong with that. What's really at stake here is the concept of ownership. I mean, we'll make a lot more money showing other people how to do this than we would make by trying to penetrate the egg, by trying to do licensing agreements in a playing field that is not level.
I understand that part. I mean, you're saying it before, when I asked that question before, you're saying you're just asking us just to build our own. But so
if people want us to come help them build them, we're happy to do it.
Okay.
No problem. We do it all the time.
That's the question I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, all the time, you bet.
Thank you for your question. So I'm 25 years old, and I guess for close to the last 5 years, I've been looking into alternative medicine, alternative energy, and been involved with a lot of interesting people doing great work. The struggle I have is everything I've learned has been outside of an academic institution. There's not anything that would train me in a very organized, disciplined manner to accomplish any of these things that we're talking about. I mean, I could toil away and go and become a doctor, but the more closely associated I get with the problem, I feel a greater sense of urgency to be involved now. So what kind of educational opportunities are there, internships, time spent for someone in my position who's free and available? But
Sure, you bet.
That's a great question. Okay, I have just recently been invited to join a movement that is the equivalent of what happened when Andrew Carnegie died. He left his entire fortune to push forth the mission of homeopathic medicine in the United States. But the executor of his estate spent all the money to develop allopathic medicine. And within 10 years, all the medical schools had been shut down except for the ones that were using allopathic medicine. Allopathic means to make something incompatible with life. Homeopathic medicine was completely different, and then eclectic medicine used medicinal herbs, homeopathics, and some drugs. So they kind of were the dominant medical force until about 1930. We now have the opportunity that some of these billionaires they've wised up, and now we have a replication in the right direction. So to answer your question, we're going to be forming an accrediting agency that will teach integrative oncology across the world in politically safe countries. And so, because of the internet, we'll be able to access globally. Because we have enough money behind us, we'll be able to translate across the world. Because we have highly trained PhDs and MDs in this field already, they'll be able to talk the correct language to get not only the current medical doctors, but the doctors of the future to learn about it through the internet, through distance learning programs and on-site clinical practical studies. So in the same way that he's discussing, I'm sure that sooner or later somebody with money is going to come by and say, I love what you're doing here. In order to save the planet, let me help you fund it. But would you then set up a teaching system so that young folks like yourself can then take advantage through the internet of learning everything you need to know and bypass the whole we do have to change the paradigm of how education is happening in this country, and the internet is probably the best way I know.
Does Akiro have any comments?
Yeah, you said it's a good question.
Let him use the same mic because that's better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, do that, Akiro.
It's a good question. So, your world is going to change. The world's going to change drastically in the next 50 years. You're going to be still around in 50 years from now. Did you come out of UT here, or it doesn't actually matter? But
I went to ACC for a couple years.
So, most of the degree programs in the country, all the universities, they're all cookie cutter. Okay.
Cookie cutter.
They're all reproductions. There's no distinguishing feature comparing, for example, UT to A&M engineering, for example. Okay. Corporate America is big time on college campuses. You just go to the Commons here. You have Taco Bell and Wendy's and every corporate America is sponsoring ExxonMobil, and everybody is sponsoring senior design projects at all the universities. Okay, Boeing is, and so you have to be bipolar. I mean, bipolar meaning.
Oh, is that what that means?
Well, almost.
In order to maintain and put food on your table and pay the rent, you're gonna have to maintain some employment. Okay, but the other half is to, I think, what you don't have that I didn't have is the social networking. So if you're going to make a commitment to, in terms of your home and energy, for example, you need to tap into your friends and people that want, a $10,000. We were talking about a $10,000 project for some clean energy technologies. Get a $10,000 check, but you have to deliver with your friends and retrofit or fit something that some homeowner wants to get off the grid in increments, right? So you're going to have to do those. You're going to have to do those kinds of things, and that's part of your life because and then be disruptive and innovative in what you do. And unfortunately, college campuses don't realize that. They're not putting that into the curriculum. Okay, taking inventions invention ideas, old ideas, that are open source, and letting students go at it, produce a product, and if it gets famous enough that corporate America on college campuses, if they start complaining, then you use the power of the social networks to complain back. But you're going to get into situations where some of your friends, whose mom and dad write the checks for college tuition, they work for corporate America. So you're going to have to make some ethical decisions there. Okay. But that's going to be a,
reliable, realistic models. $10,000 mark, that works.
yeah.
We need the model to replicate in a community, which we happen to live in the geographical center of Texas. 5,000 people, 3,000 homes. I just happen to have a network there where we got about 75% of the vote of things that happen in that community. So we kind of have a nice little niche here.
One house at a time, one neighborhood, one street at a time. Change the
One heart at a time. Touch
right.
one
And
heart.
we are the
Yeah.
heart of Texas. And as the heart knows,
You can't argue with that.
okay,
Anyway.
he
Let
is
me make,
available
let,
as
let
an
me make one,
apprentice.
let me make one more comment. Because look, this guy is the epitome of the best you do with intention and good quality instruction and information. Being grounded in the basics is essential. If you don't understand the basics of physics, if you don't understand the basics of chemistry, the basics of fluid mechanics, the basis of nuclear physics, if you don't understand the basics, you're screwed. Because you're going to believe stuff you make up that isn't true, and it's going to take you in a direction that's going to guarantee you'll fail. What you have to do is pay the price to get grounded in the basics, and then pay attention to what doesn't make sense. Because there's a lot of stuff in basic science that's absolutely bomb-proof. It's right on. But where you find all the best information is in the anomalies, in the places where it doesn't make sense. That's your opportunity. But you got to go there, man. I mean, it took me 7 years to get an undergraduate degree. I ended up with 389 quarter credit hours.
We're after that open source you mentioned.
What?
That open source of Home Depot materials, $10,000, 5 kilowatt unit. That's where. I know, but to make it, to speed it, it'd be a lot quicker if he just saw it happen, built one, document it, and let's replicate.
Well,
So you as a parent, I'm saying that sponsor, give $10,000 to a senior design team and say, produce this for me and install it in my home. That's the deliverable that you have to produce.
Is it his model, though? We're looking for a real. We're tired of fluff.
Yeah, so the university is not hiring somebody like him and saying, here are all these ideas, get these students teams of 4 or 5 engineers, right? And yeah, they should. They're not putting innovation or a new twist on the curriculum. We produce 14,000 bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering each year, right? And so when I tell my students who are finishing their bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, you're going to be competing with 14,000 others for jobs.
who don't know how to do anything.
Right. And you have a disadvantage because you're a University of Idaho graduate. You're not an MIT graduate. Okay? So an MIT graduate in bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering is going to get a job because the rankings say this is the ranking, right? It's just like sports, right? So you have to do. University of Idaho, just a generic, ex-university, has to realize that they have to produce a signature graduate, that's the term I use, that makes that student a little bit different than 14,000 others. Okay?
The other question I was going to ask is, from my experience, the United States is the most difficult place in the world to work in these particular areas. Do y'all have suggestions on other countries and other institutions outside the United States where it would be a better use of your time?
No, and here's why. Right here in Austin, you've got an incubator for some of the very best technology companies on the planet. Right here in Austin. You have access to technology, you have access to information, you have access to certifiable competence, you have access to parts, you have access to supply. You can outsource any kind of incremental requirement you ever will have to do what you want to do. your ability to have access to information is essentially more unfettered here than it is anywhere else in the world. I'm not saying that it's completely uncensored or completely transparent, but it's better here than anywhere else. And you've got access to cable, and you've got access to fiber, and you've got access to IP6, and if you're operating in this institution or any other Texas institution of higher education, you've got access to internet too. So you've got access to all the very best information anywhere on the planet right here. I wouldn't spend a nickel to go someplace else. I think this is a perfect spot. And we've talked about taking our technology to other countries, and the minute I start doing any research into what kind of resources are available and what kind of political environment I'm operating in, it scares the hell out of me. Because I don't want people knocking on my door in the middle of the night. You know, I just don't. I mean, I'm a garage guy, figuratively speaking. The idea that a team of little guys with a limited budget in a small facility, a garage, are going to find out what makes the Higgs boson behave the way it does, not going to happen. Okay? The idea that we're going to find a way to build a machine that is efficient and affordable and does not do any of the nasty things that we're interested in is really good, because garage inventing is alive and well in America. The real challenge you have is finding enough of the right kind of resources to support your work so you pay your bills and keep the lights on while you're trying to figure out what makes the world go round. And it's hard. I mean, I've been a self-employed innovator for 50 years. I have only seldom and occasionally, infrequently held jobs where other people tried to tell me what to do, and I'm the world's worst employee, so I don't work there anymore. Because I like to figure out my own stuff, and I hang out with people who like to figure out their own stuff. And over time, you make mistakes, and you pay a price, and you learn. And that's how the game goes. But it's not like making golf balls, man.
Thank you so much.
All right. You completely and thoroughly answered my question. It was about going to third world countries or going offshore for things. So I'll just make it a quick comment because he sparked my thinking about my own sons. I was thinking one of the best places I find for what's up and coming is to go to military patents. And, I crave going through the military patents because you can see things that they don't announce till way, years and years down the line. And and for the local things, just some really nerdy SIG, SIGs, special interest groups. You're right. This is an incredible place to work, and like-minded souls can just act like a catalyst.
Well, it's very interesting. You correct me if I'm wrong, but when you finally get in the groove,
Mm-hmm.
you really get rolling. All of a sudden, when you're committed and you're focused and you're pouring your life force into it, and it's good, and you're working at it, and it's working, synergy starts to happen. I don't know what that synchronicity thing is. I don't care. It works. But it's all about exercising your will and exercising your commitment and staying focused and, not believing your own press releases. So you can make things happen, for sure.
Thank you for your approach. I'm learning as much from your attitude as from the knowledge that you brought here. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, anyway, on that line, let's see, now I went to Tech Shop in Round Rock. We actually have a place in Round Rock where you can learn all kinds of fabrication stuff. And I've taken like at least 14 classes there, learn all kinds of crazy stuff. So, and I recommend anybody that wants to go ahead and pursue some, invention or something like that, check that out. Okay, but we've got a lot of experts here on Fukushima, and I would like, if possible, to see if you'd be willing to brainstorm perhaps some further things that might perhaps be done at Fukushima to supplement or perhaps even speed up or do better what they're doing.
Let me just
because my perspective is that right now the resources of TEPCO is being used. It's just a utility company, and they don't have very many resources. You know, it's like a nation's military resources, I think, need to go into fixing this. That's just my opinion.
Yeah,
And I would like to build a wall of concrete under the ground, drill a whole bunch of wells, seal off the water table, and then do it diagonally to cap the bottom of that.
yeah. So let me just tell you this: that
Buildings and
the finest minds in the world, the finest minds from all over the world, have looked at this. And as the good doctor here has already said, we do not have the technology nor the know-how to clean this up. It just simply doesn't exist on the radar screen. We just don't know how to do this. Now, the New York Times just came out with an article on this a few days ago. And what it says there is, and pretty much what you just said, TEPCO itself does not have the capacity, the competence, nor the know-how, the resources, the skill set to fix this problem, to remediate, to clean it up. They just don't know how to do it. So we have a heck of a problem. Now, Einstein said a couple things that I think are pertinent here. He said to perfect a nuclear reaction to boil water is a hell of a way to boil water.
right, yeah.
And the second thing he said, not at the same time, was that the definition of insanity is to keep on doing the same thing over and over and over again but expect a different outcome. When the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has stated that these boiler-based reactors will fail on average once every 25 years, I'm talking about a complete failure no matter what the backup systems are, you just don't make a lot of sanity come out of that if you keep on doing it. You got to change the way that things are running. And as David has pointed out, it's the political powers that be that want to keep driving the system the way it is because it's the best way that they know how right now with the systems in place to make money off of the power industry. Now, I have to disagree with what David just said. He's already been visited by the powers that be that threatened him, not once, but several times. Same thing occurs in integrative oncology. There are times when we can teach in this country because it is the best to be open access to get it across on the internet and so on and so forth. But to run, I mean, I can tell you right now, I know half a dozen of my colleagues that I just talked to recently that have had their clinic shut down because they're using IPT, which is chemotherapy at only 10% the dose, using insulin and DMSO to target the tumor. They're getting 70% of stage 4 as well, meaning complete dissolution of all traces of cancer. Okay? And they're getting 90% of stage 2s and under, 90%, 95%, within 90 days, complete no traces of cancer. Okay? The problem with that is that it competes against the current system that's in operation right now. So to answer this young gentleman's question, it's a hell of a mess. You can't do in this country what the powers that be don't want you to do unless you do it how Sheila's doing it. You do it from one house to the next. My goal, after I start teaching integrative oncology across the world to the clinics that be, we've gone to a country where we have sign-off from the heads of government. You are safe here. We got that before we went in and opened up the first 3 clinics. Okay? That was a blessing. That normally doesn't happen, but it happened in this particular case. Down the road, as that begins to expand and we start having millionaires that have cancer, because there's going to be a lot of them that get cancer, they start getting completely well, we'll have the system pretty well established that it'll begin to spread and we'll force our way into these other countries because by popular demand. But in this country, we have resources of people that if they know just a little bit, like what we're going to talk about tomorrow, we can prevent these tremendous, tumultuous health conditions from arising in the first place if we just simply understand what's going on with the production of hydrogen peroxide in the body. It's a major trigger for all chronic degenerative diseases, especially cancer. But yes, it's drapsley.com. Dr. Apsley or Dr. Apsley spelled out, it doesn't matter, .com. We're going to be able to get into the homes. So to the extent that we can go under the radar and give the information to people how to build up their own immunity to keep it really strong, then we can at least get to the point where we're strong enough to take it to the political forum, and then with these laws 9.004, change the way that our locality is using smart meters or the power supply that the companies have to buy it back from us when we're making an excess. I know some groups that are doing that now. We can make a difference because we do have a republic here in the United States. We just have to slowly work through the system, and we can make it work. Economically, David's right, and he's right. How are you going? You're going to have to keep one foot in making a living so you can eat and your family, and at the other time you're going to have to be operating in a way which isn't economically sustainable right now. But you're the generation that's going to make or break it there. Does that make?
Okay, so today we've established that it appears that there's no way that any kind of a substantial solution is going to be solvable in a 15 to maybe 50-year period.
My understanding, but
No, I think let's make one thing clear. TEPCO is a utility, electrical utility company. Okay. One of the reasons why you have to understand that I think people don't understand. They're a utility. They're an operator of a nuclear power plant. It's like being a chauffeur. A chauffeur is not a mechanic. Okay, he can't fix a car that's broken. Okay, he just drives the car. TEPCO is a utility that operates nuclear power plants. They don't know how to fix a broken reactor. Okay, and that's why it's going so badly. Okay, so at this pace, it's going to take 50 years. 40 years, certainly, 50 years. And right now, on average, the prime minister changes only lasts about 2 years in Japan. 40 years from now, we don't even know. That's 20 prime ministers from now on, okay? In 40 years. We don't even know who the prime minister will be. In 40 years, the population of Japan will go from 125 million to 80 million because it's aging rapidly, okay? It'll be a completely different country. All right, 40 years from now. So I'm just advocating that it needs to be international because we need to speed up that process. Even 10 years makes a difference. And I think it's apparent they don't have the expertise. The world community has some expertise. The Russians have, the French have, the U.S. has, in terms of remediation, restoration, and recovery at the plant. But there are a lot of things that we don't have. There's a lot of engineering challenges there. There are a lot of potential intellectual property to be generated from the technology solutions that we might apply there. There's a great opportunity. So the insistence of the Japanese government and TEPCO trying to do this on their own is not very helpful right now.
Right.
Okay. So.
Okay. I'm. Let's see, moving towards something here. Okay, so you're saying 50 years. 50 years from now, it took 2 years, a little less than 2 years, for the radioactive debris and things like that to start affecting the west coast of the Pacific Rim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right now, economically, the Atlantic Rim is collapsing. In order for humanity to have a nice place to survive, I haven't thought how to say this smoothly, the Pacific Rim civilization and economy needed to kick into high gear. But now that the Fukushima is kind of spoiling that, it's going to seriously stunt civilization along in the Pacific Rim, for who knows, 1,000 years. That means that humanity, it's very possible that we're going to jump at each other's throat and try to annihilate each other, even before the Pacific, the poison from the Pacific can expand out into the South Indian Ocean,
right.
Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, you're correct. We're destroying our planet, and we're having no respect for our natural resources, including animals, the animal kingdom, and humankind.
And this is why I think that instead of our leaders salivating over building towards, I'm being graphic here, building towards a third world war, so that they can all make profits as they all
Right.
have through history.
Human history is about fighting for resources. Okay,
I
that's
think we need to
that's an
take
old model.
our military budgets and put them towards trying to save civilization along the Pacific Rim,
Yeah,
specifically Fukushima. That's what I think
right.
needs to be done.
I've said a number of times. I mean, I'm debating whether I should say here, but politicians have two interests, right? They want to get elected for the first time and then stay elected. Okay, so some people have said politicians are like palm trees, right? Whichever way the wind blows, they'll bend. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, as we said, we're in a republic here. So, house by house, neighborhood by neighborhood, we need to make some changes. Yeah.
I have a main question just for Tokihiro-san, but basically, I just want to make a side comment that if I had a very cheap energy source, I'd probably focus on, like, I don't know, producing aluminum or something if I couldn't resell it. So if you do this project, you get a very you're able to almost use very cheap energy, then maybe you can use it for aluminum production or something, and that takes a lot of resources and resell that. And good luck with that. So anyway, my main question is for Tokihiro-san. I'm basically a Flyjing.
You're closer to the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm a Flyjing, so I was a gaijin for about 10 years, and in my experience in Japan, that's basically an outsider. It's usually what you refer to, someone from a different country in Japan. And then when I evacuated my family, my 3-year-old son, from within 100 miles of Fukushima, the Fukushima meltdown, I became a Flyjing. So that's the fly, because I flew, and I'm a person that flew away. So that's just kind of my background. You come from I guess, I don't know if you're you say second generation or third generation Japanese, or maybe your family has
I'm
been...
kind of 1.5 right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
He's fractal.
Yeah.
So,
Fractal gen. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, because I think your background is in nuclear physics, and I listened to a Kyoto assistant professor in nuclear energy. His name's Hiroaki Koide. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he has a very good story on how it's all in Japanese, because his main language is Japanese. But he talks about how he basically.
Could you ask your question?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, because we're ready to. This has been a long day, so
I just want to know about his. He talks about how he, in his laboratory, had to keep contamination down to a certain level before he could leave. And when the Fukushima accident happened, people were living in higher levels of contamination than he was allowed to leave his laboratory. And so he talks about it pulling his world inside out, because suddenly the government's telling people to live in contamination levels higher than he was allowed to leave his laboratory. And I'm just wondering if you have some kind of similar experience from that you could relate.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because I can end the day here. You have to understand, Japan is a country of contrasts, and I keep repeating that. But you have Japanese people can sit next to each other and completely ignore each other, or they can be talking to each other very chummy, right? So it's a country of severe contrast. That's maybe not quite as you don't see that in the United States. So that's it. Things flip over very quickly in Japan, and that's when you know that, then it'll help you understand Japan a little bit better. So thank you.
well, thank you for coming. See you tomorrow.
So I remember the day I was writing.